In Syria today, one of the oldest and smallest religious communities is fighting for its very survival. The Druze, people who have lived in the mountains of the Levant for over 1,000 years now, face what their leaders call a genocidal campaign. The killers are not just extremist militias, but heartbreakingly members of the very state that once vowed to protect them. And what you just witnessed was Israel unleashing a wave of airstrikes on the Syrian capital, Damascus. A thunderous answer to the chaos erupting in Syria's south, where clashes have already left blood in the streets and smoke in the skies. Ever since the fall of Bashar al-Assad in December 2024, Syria's new transitional leader, Ahmad al-Sharaa, better known as Abu Mohammed al-Golani, the former chief of Hayat Tahrir al Sham HTS, has overseen some of the worst atrocities against the Druze in living memory. In today's Syria, for this small ancient community, there is nowhere left to hide. In July 2025, the worst violence in years erupted. What began as the kidnapping of a Druze vegetable merchant by armed Bedouin tribesmen spiraled into days of bloodshed in Suwayda province. Instead of stopping the violence, government forces joined it, raiding Druze neighborhoods, looting homes, and executing civilians. By month's end, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights counted over 1,600 deaths in Suwayda alone. At least 166 were civilians, and 401 killings were confirmed as deliberate executions. In one harrowing case, 12 people from the same family were shot inside their home. Videos circulated of Druze religious leaders being humiliated, their mustaches shaved off, a deep insult in local culture, before being beaten by fighters wearing government badges. Sheikh Hikmat al-Hijri, the community's most prominent leader, called it a genocidal campaign against his community. But this is not the first time. In 2015, when the group was still known as Al-Nusra Front, HTS fighters massacred 20 to 24 Druze villagers in Quablos after accusing them of blasphemy. Old men, women, even children, shot where they stood for resisting the confiscation of their land. Yes, the pattern is not new. The warning signs were always there, so why did the world ignore them? If massacres have been happening for a decade, why is there still no system to protect this community? And perhaps most importantly, who exactly are the Druze, and why have they so often found themselves surrounded by enemies? The Druze call themselves Al-Muwahhidun, the Unitarians or monotheists. They represent a distinctive Arab ethno-religious minority whose origins trace back to the 11th century Egypt during the Fatimid Caliphate. Their faith emerged around 1017 CE when Hamza ibn Ali proclaimed Fatimid Caliph al-Hakim bi-Amr Allah as a divine manifestation, developing into a syncretic religion that incorporates elements from Ismaili Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Neoplatonism, and various philosophical traditions. At its heart is a single, uncompromising belief that God is one, indivisible, and present in every part of existence. He is not a distant ruler in the heavens, but here, in the fabric of the world. They believe that every soul walks a long journey across many lifetimes. Through reincarnation, a person returns again and again, each time given the chance to grow closer to spiritual perfection, until they are finally united with the divine. So their code of life is captured in 7 moral precepts, a commitment to truthfulness, mutual protection, rejecting evil, trusting in God's will, and living with honor. Their religious practices are deliberately kept secret. Conversion is forbidden. Marriage outside the faith is almost unheard of. Even within the community, there is a sacred divide, the Ukol, the initiates, who study hidden scriptures and carry the weight of spiritual knowledge, and the Jahal, the uninitiated majority, who live the faith without access to its deepest secrets. Actually, their secrecy is for their survival. For centuries, the Druze have been hunted, misunderstood, and forced to hide who they are. The doctrine of taqiyya, concealing one's faith under threat, is not just a theological idea, but a lifeline that has allowed them to endure wars, invasions, and massacres. Under both Hafiz and Bashar al-Assad's 5-decade rule, the Druze occupied a careful middle ground, a minority worth keeping close but never fully trusted. Before the war, they made up roughly 3 to 4% of Syria's population, about 700,000 people concentrated mainly in Suwayda province, with smaller communities near Damascus and in scattered mountain villages. Well, The arrangement was one of pragmatic tolerance. The Assad regime's relationship with the Druze was characterized by strategic accommodation rather than genuine protection. If you're enjoying this deep dive, please like the video and consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us bring more global insights. Now, back to the video. The Alawite-dominated government, itself a religious minority, cultivated relationships with various minority communities as part of its survival strategy, presenting itself as their protector against Sunni majoritarian rule. However, this protection came with significant constraints and expectations. When the Syrian civil war erupted, the Druze embraced a strategy of calculated neutrality. Their slogan summed it up: Syrian blood should not be shed by Syrians. They refused to send young men to die in far-off battles, focusing instead on defending their own territory. Local defense units, the Rijal al-Karama known as the Men of Dignity, emerged to shield towns from both rebel incursions and the regime's own heavy-handedness. This approach allowed them to maintain relative autonomy while avoiding direct confrontation with either the regime or opposition forces. And yes, this uneasy pact worked for years. Over 20,000 Druze fighters were technically within Syrian army ranks, but operated only in their home regions, barring other pro-regime forces from entering Suwayda. The result was a fragile form of self-rule, a quiet corner in a burning country, but it was never true independence. The regime periodically pressured Druze leaders to provide more active military support, particularly during critical phases of the war. Some Druze youth were recruited into government forces, but the community successfully resisted broader conscription efforts. The Assad government provided financial and military support to Druze militias, but this assistance was primarily aimed at maintaining the status quo rather than genuine empowerment. But everything changed after December 2024. When Assad fell and Golani's HTS took power, tolerance was replaced by ideology. For the Druze, it was the beginning of open season. HTS, born from the al-Qaeda-linked Jabhat al-Nusra, brought with it a rigid Sunni Islamist ideology that brands religious minorities as heretics. Under its rule, the persecution of the Druze moved from shadowy harassment to official policy. The group's unamended stance demands that Druze publicly renounce their faith and convert to Sunni Islam, or face consequences. Other minorities have felt the same tightening. Christians silenced from ringing church bells, ceremonies forbidden, and entire traditions erased. But for the Druze, whose secrecy has long been a shield, HTS's drive for ideological conformity became an existential threat. On the ground, intimidation is constant. HTS-aligned forces raid Druze villages, while pro-government militias, supposedly under transitional authority, have been implicated in massacres. In every case, Damascus either shrugs off responsibility or blames rogue actors. And the result is a Syria where sectarian violence thrives without restraint, and where the Druze, once precariously balanced between warring powers, are now simply in the crosshairs. But the July 2025 massacres in Suwayda triggered something unprecedented: Israeli airstrikes deep inside Syria. Officially, Tel Aviv framed its actions as a humanitarian mission to protect Syria's Druze, invoking the deep ties to Israel's own 150,000 Druze citizens, including 25,000 in the occupied Golan Heights. It began with targeted airstrikes on Syrian government forces advancing towards Suwayda. Within days, the campaign expanded. Missiles struck the Syrian Defense Ministry and even areas near the presidential palace in Damascus. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, responding to urgent appeals from Israeli Druze spiritual leader Sheikh Hayat Tahrir, who invoked Holocaust parallels, declared that Israel had a responsibility to protect the Druze across the border. But the reality is more layered. Beyond humanitarian concern, Israel has long sought to preserve a buffer zone in southern Syria, blocking Iranian-backed militias and hostile forces from approaching its borders. The Druze, wary of both Sunni Islamists and the Damascus government, were a natural fit for this strategy, potentially serving as reliable local partners. Yet this very support carries danger. It risks branding Syrian Druze as Israeli proxies, a label that could be deadly in the sectarian chessboard of Syria. Many Druze leaders inside Syria have rejected Israel's narrative outright. Israel is protecting its own interests. They are not protecting anyone, neither the Druze nor anyone else. where Assad's rule was a cold transaction, minorities in exchange for stability, HTS governance is fueled by absolutism. In its vision of a Sunni Islamic state, religious diversity is not tolerated, it is to be dismantled. This shift has meant the dismantling of Druze self-defense, the disarming of local militias, and the folding of minority communities into centralized military structures they neither trust nor control. Political power has all but vanished for them. A single Druze minister sits in an HTS-dominated cabinet. The strikes rippled far beyond Suwayda. Saudi Arabia condemned what it called Israel's repeated aggression against Syrian sovereignty. Damascus accused Israel of inflaming sectarian tensions to undermine the new Syrian government. And what began as a local sectarian tragedy has now been internationalized. And with each new actor drawn in, the path to resolution grows more tangled. So, the Syrian Druze stand at perhaps the most precarious moment in their modern history, a people caught between annihilation and adaptation, forced to ask whether they can survive at all in Syria now taking shape. Within Druze leadership, the defining strategic question is federalism or independence. Advocates of federalism envision a system where Suwayda retains cultural and religious autonomy within Syria, a model akin to Lebanon, where the Druze hold significant political influence. This would safeguard identity while preserving access to national institutions. Others, hardened by massacres and the state's refusal to protect them, now openly discuss secession. But the dream of an independent Suwayda faces daunting obstacles: economic dependence on Damascus, geographic isolation, and near total lack of international recognition. Demographics add another layer of crisis. Violence and displacement have fractured the once compact Druze heartland. Since 2024, more than 175,000 Druze have been uprooted, scattering across Syria and beyond, eroding the geographic cohesion that has historically been their best defense. Even the August 2025 Minority Conference in Hasaka, where over 400 minority representatives demanded constitutional guarantees for fair representation, produced no concessions from Damascus. The interim government's centralist Sunni Arab framework leaves little room for minority autonomy, and even less for Druze influence. Some hope for international guarantees, perhaps under UN protection. Others warn that relying on outsiders is a path to extinction. Without decisive action, inside Syria and from abroad, these ancient people could vanish from their homeland, not with a sultan. So now the Druze of Syria are at a crossroads. Do they push for autonomy or even independence in Suwayda? Can they survive politically in a state run by hardline Sunni Islamists? Will foreign protection save them or paint a target on their backs? For over 1,000 years, the Druze have endured crusaders, caliphates, empires, and dictators. But today, they face something far more dangerous. If you found this analysis valuable, please consider subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into geopolitics. We would love to hear your thoughts. Drop your comments below and let us know what you think. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.